The Sterling Grand Hotel's elegance was disrupted by one striking detail: a bold red MAGA hat atop Walter Hayes' head. To Walter, it symbolized his hard-fought success. But to Amanda, the receptionist, it screamed conflict and controversy. As assumptions clashed with reality, no one in the room could predict the jaw-dropping truth about Walter's identity. As American citizen, let us know what your opinion about MAGA hat was. The Sterling Grand Hotel was a monument to luxury, a place where the rich and famous mingled under glittering chandeliers, and where perfection wasn't just expected, it was required. But on this crisp autumn evening, the pristine air of elegance was about to be shattered by an act of quiet defiance that would leave everyone in the lobby speechless. Walter Hayes, an elderly black man with a calm demeanor and an unshakable sense of dignity, strode into the lobby. His presence, though unassuming, turned heads, not because of who he was, but because of what he wore. Perched confidently atop his head was a red MAGA hat, its bold white lettering stark against the glitzy backdrop of the hotel. To Walter, the hat symbolized his personal journey, resilience, hard work, and the belief in opportunity. To others, however, it screamed controversy. Amanda Gray, the front desk receptionist, stiffened as soon as her eyes landed on the man and his hat. She prided herself on maintaining the hotel's high standards, and in her mind, Walter's appearance, particularly the hat, clashed with everything the Sterling Grand stood for. "This isn't the place for you," she muttered under her breath, squaring her shoulders as she prepared to confront him. She didn't know it yet, but the man she was about to dismiss wasn't just another guest. He was about to redefine what the Sterling Grand truly stood for. Amanda Gray stood firm behind the polished front desk, her fingers gripping the edge as she stared at Walter Hayes, her disapproval evident. The red MAGA hat on his head seemed to mock her values, and she was determined to take a stand. In her mind, the Sterling Grand Hotel was a sanctuary of refinement and inclusivity, and Walter's presence, more specifically, his choice of attire, clashed with the image she sought to uphold. Walter, however, remained calm. He tilted his head slightly, meeting Amanda's gaze with quiet confidence. "Why exactly can't I be served?" he asked again, his tone steady and unthreatening. Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line as she crossed her arms. "That hat," she said curtly, her voice dropping but still firm. "It represents hate and division. Many of our guests would find it offensive, and we can't allow someone wearing it to disturb the atmosphere of the hotel." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Walter's mouth, though it wasn't one of amusement. "The hat represents a lot of things," he replied, his voice low but clear. "To you, it might mean division. To me, it's a reminder of resilience, opportunity, and my belief in the values that built this country." Amanda's brows furrowed, her arms tightening against her chest. "You can believe what you want," she snapped, "but this is a private establishment, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone who disrupts the environment." "That hat disrupts." Walter remained unruffled. "Ma'am, I've said nothing to anyone here. I've caused no scene. How is my hat disruptive?" "It's not just the hat," Amanda retorted, her tone growing sharper. "It's what it stands for. People see it, and they feel unwelcome. They feel unsafe. You're making them uncomfortable." Walter glanced around the lobby, noting the curious glances of bystanders. Some guests murmured quietly to one another, while others watched in silence, their expressions ranging from interest to disapproval. A few seemed to agree with Amanda's stance, nodding subtly in her direction. Others, however, appeared uncomfortable with the confrontation, shifting uneasily or averting their gaze. "I see," Walter said after a moment, his gaze returning to Amanda. "And you've decided I don't belong here because of how you feel about my hat?" Amanda bristled. "It's not about me," she said defensively. "It's about the other guests and the standards of this hotel." Walter's expression grew thoughtful, and he adjusted the brim of his hat slightly. "So, let me get this straight. I've walked into this hotel quietly, dressed appropriately, conducted myself respectfully, and without speaking to anyone, I'm deemed unfit to be here because of a piece of clothing." Amanda hesitated, sensing the growing attention from the crowd. A few guests were now recording the exchange on their phones, their faces lit with intrigue. Despite this, Amanda doubled down. "It's not personal," she said stiffly. "But you have to understand that wearing a symbol like that, especially here, sends the wrong message." Walter's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet disappointment. "Symbols are powerful, aren't they?" he said. "They can mean different things to different people. To you, this hat might represent something negative, but to me, it's a reminder of my journey. A journey that includes struggles you may not even begin to imagine." Amanda blinked, momentarily thrown off by his words, but her resolve quickly returned. "That may be true for you," she said, her tone softening slightly, "but you have to understand how others perceive it." "And what about how you perceive it?" Walter asked, his voice calm but pointed. "Have you stopped to ask yourself why you're so quick to judge someone you've never met? Why you assume the worst without knowing a thing about them?" Amanda opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Walter's calm, measured demeanor clashed starkly with her escalating tone, and she suddenly felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. A voice from the crowd broke the silence. "Let the man stay. He's not bothering anyone," a guest said, earning murmurs of agreement from several others. Amanda's cheeks flushed as she glanced at the growing crowd. The scrutiny unnerved her, but she stood her ground. Before Amanda could reply, another voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" The firm but composed tone belonged to Daniel Reed, the hotel's general manager, who had appeared from across the lobby. His tall frame and authoritative presence immediately commanded attention. "Mr. Reed," Amanda said, relief mingling with defiance as she gestured toward Walter. "This gentleman is wearing a MAGA hat, and I've explained that we can't serve him. It's causing a disturbance." Daniel's sharp eyes flicked to Walter, his expression betraying no emotion. "A disturbance, you say?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes," Amanda said firmly. "That hat. It's inappropriate for this environment." Walter met Daniel's gaze and gave him a polite nod. "Good evening, sir," he said simply. Daniel paused, then turned back to Amanda. "Why don't I speak with this gentleman privately? I'll take it from here." He gestured toward Walter, who nodded and followed him toward a nearby hallway, leaving Amanda to bask in the smug satisfaction of what she thought was a victory. But the murmurs in the crowd suggested otherwise. Some guests shook their heads in disapproval, while others whispered about Amanda's behavior. The phones recording the incident stayed trained on her, and an uneasy feeling began to settle in the pit of her stomach. Little did Amanda know, the truth about Walter Hayes, and her own assumptions, was about to unravel in a way she could never have anticipated. The private hallway outside Daniel Reed's office was quiet, a stark contrast to the murmurs of the lobby. Walter Hayes followed Daniel at a measured pace, his calm demeanor unwavering. The general manager held the door open for him, then closed it gently behind them. The polished office, with its dark mahogany desk and plush leather chairs, exuded the same air of luxury as the hotel itself. Daniel gestured toward a chair. "Please, Mr. Hayes, have a seat." Walter nodded, taking a seat across from the desk. He set his MAGA hat on the desk with care, its bold red color a striking contrast against the dark wood. Daniel took his own seat, his posture straight and professional, though his eyes betrayed a hint of discomfort. "I want to start by apologizing for what just happened," Daniel began, his tone measured. "I was observing the exchange from the lobby, and I understand how inappropriate the situation became." Walter raised an eyebrow, leaning back slightly in his chair. "Inappropriate?" he repeated, his voice calm but tinged with a note of curiosity. "That's one way to describe it." Daniel nodded, his hands clasped on the desk. "It's not the image we want to project here at the Sterling Grand. I'll address Amanda's actions immediately. Her behavior was unacceptable, and I assure you, this is not reflective of our values." Walter held up a hand, silencing Daniel gently. "Before you rush to conclusions about Amanda, let me ask you something. Why do you think she reacted the way she did?" Daniel hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I suppose she made assumptions based on your hat," he said carefully. "She allowed her personal biases to cloud her judgment." Walter nodded slowly. "Exactly. And that's not unique to Amanda. People do it all the time. The question is, what do we do about it?" Daniel frowned, leaning forward. Mr. Hayes, with respect, I don't think this is something you should have had to endure. You've built this hotel to be a symbol of inclusivity and excellence, which is exactly why I'm not going to let this moment pass. Walter interrupted, his voice firm but still calm. Amanda's behavior wasn't just about me. It reflects a broader issue that needs to be addressed. Daniel paused, absorbing Walter's words. He was keenly aware of who Walter Hayes was, not just the owner of the Sterling Grand Hotel, but a self-made entrepreneur whose story was widely admired. Walter's rise from a modest upbringing to owning one of the city's most prestigious hotels was a testament to his resilience and determination. What do you suggest we do? Daniel asked, his tone respectful. Walter smiled faintly. For now, I suggest we let this play out. Don't reveal who I am just yet. Let Amanda and the others in the lobby sit with their assumptions a little longer. Daniel raised an eyebrow but nodded. As you wish, Mr. Hayes. But are you sure about this? The longer this drags on, the more uncomfortable things could get. For everyone. Walter chuckled softly, leaning forward. Growth is rarely comfortable, Daniel, but it's necessary. Let her think about her actions. Then, when the moment is right, we'll address it. Together. Back in the lobby, Amanda stood behind the desk, her arms crossed and her expression smug. She watched the entrance to the hallway where Walter and Daniel had disappeared, confident that her manager would back her decision. To her, she was upholding the hotel's reputation, ensuring it remained a space free of discomfort for its high-profile guests. Around her, the atmosphere had shifted. Guests murmured quietly, some clearly uneasy about what had transpired. A few younger guests whispered among themselves, their phones still pointed in Amanda's direction, capturing every detail. Amanda ignored them, her focus on maintaining her resolve. 15 minutes passed before Daniel returned to the lobby, walking briskly toward Amanda. His expression was unreadable, and Amanda straightened, ready to hear his validation of her actions. Well? She asked expectantly. Daniel glanced around the room, noting the growing crowd of curious onlookers. He stepped closer to Amanda, lowering his voice. Amanda, I need you to prepare yourself. There's more to this situation than you realize. Amanda frowned, her confidence faltering slightly. What do you mean? Daniel sighed, his gaze steady. Let's just say that you might want to reconsider how you approach guests in the future, especially ones you think don't belong. Before Amanda could respond, Daniel turned back toward the hallway. I'll be back shortly. Stay professional and avoid further confrontation. Amanda watched him walk away, confusion and unease beginning to creep in. She glanced around the lobby, noticing the judgmental stares of some guests and the quiet murmurs of others. Her earlier confidence was beginning to waver. Back in his office, Daniel and Walter finalized their plan. Walter stood, placing his MAGA hat back on his head, his expression thoughtful. This isn't about punishment, he said. It's about teaching a lesson. One Amanda and everyone else here won't forget. Daniel nodded. Understood, Mr. Hayes. I'll make sure the staff learns from this, and I'll handle the aftermath appropriately. Walter smiled, extending a hand. Thank you, Daniel. Now, let's see how this unfolds. The two men exited the office together, heading back to the lobby where Amanda and the crowd were waiting, unaware of the revelation that was about to turn the situation on its head. As Walter Hayes re-entered the grand lobby, the hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft notes of the piano filled the air once more. Yet, the atmosphere felt heavier than when he had first arrived. The exchange at the front desk lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it, creating an undercurrent of tension. Walter walked slowly, his posture composed, as he made his way toward the lounge area. His red MAGA hat remained firmly on his head, drawing occasional glances from guests and staff alike. Some looks were subtle, others openly disapproving, but Walter met them all with quiet dignity. He wasn't here to cause a scene, but to observe, to see firsthand how people responded when faced with their own biases. He paused near a group of staff members conversing quietly in a corner. Their eyes darted toward him before quickly looking away, their hushed tones betraying a mix of curiosity and unease. Walter noted their behavior but said nothing, moving on to a pair of guests sitting near the fireplace. The man nudged his companion, gesturing subtly toward Walter with a raised eyebrow. The woman shook her head and whispered something, her expression a mix of disapproval and discomfort. Walter found a seat near the large bay windows overlooking the city. As he sat, he glanced around the room, taking in the interactions unfolding around him. A waiter passed by, his gaze flicking briefly to Walter's hat before he adjusted his tray and continued without acknowledgement. Walter smiled faintly. Small actions spoke volumes. For Walter, this was more than an exercise in patience. It was a reflection of human behavior. The hat on his head, to many, was a symbol of division and controversy. To him, it was a representation of his journey, a testament to his resilience in the face of adversity. The misunderstanding stemmed not from the object itself, but from the assumptions people attached to it. He reflected on his life and the battles he had fought to get to where he was today. Growing up in poverty, facing systemic barriers, and working tirelessly to achieve success had shaped his values. The MAGA hat didn't define his politics. It represented his belief in the power of hard work and opportunity, ideals he had clung to throughout his life. Walter's gaze shifted to Amanda at the front desk. She stood rigidly, her expression still holding traces of defiance, though her posture betrayed unease. It was clear the weight of the situation was beginning to settle on her shoulders. Walter wondered how long it would take for her to reflect on her actions, to question the assumptions that had led her to this point. The Sterling Grand Hotel, Walter thought, was a microcosm of society, its grandeur a facade that sometimes masked the biases lurking beneath. He hoped today's events would serve as a mirror, forcing everyone, from Amanda to the guests and staff, to confront their prejudices. Walter's observation concluded as Daniel Reed returned, signaling that it was time for the next step in this quiet lesson in humility and growth. The grand lobby of the Sterling Grand Hotel was abuzz with quiet whispers and furtive glances as Walter Hayes and Daniel Reed returned together. Walter, with his MAGA hat still perched on his head, exuded the same calm dignity as before. Daniel's expression, however, was serious, his steps purposeful as he gestured for Walter to follow him to the center of the lobby. Amanda Gray, still stationed at the front desk, straightened as she noticed their return. Her initial confidence, shaken by Daniel's cryptic words earlier, began to falter. She expected her manager to back her decision, but the presence of Walter beside him made her uneasy. Around them, guests gathered, sensing that something important was about to unfold. Daniel cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. The piano music in the background faded as conversations hushed. All eyes were on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice firm yet composed, "I'd like to address the events that transpired earlier involving this gentleman here, Mr. Walter Hayes." Amanda's brow furrowed. Why was Daniel giving this man so much attention? Surely, he wasn't going to side with someone wearing that hat. She shifted uncomfortably as Daniel continued. "Mr. Hayes came to this hotel today as a guest. Unfortunately, he was met with judgment and disrespect based solely on assumptions." Daniel's gaze flicked briefly to Amanda, whose face began to flush. "This is not the standard we hold ourselves to at the Sterling Grand." The murmurs in the room grew louder, but Daniel raised a hand, silencing them. "There's more to this story," he said. "What many of you, including some of our staff, may not know is that Mr. Walter Hayes is not just any guest." He turned to Walter, nodding respectfully. "Mr. Hayes is the owner of the Sterling Grand Hotel." Gasps rippled through the room like a wave. Amanda froze, her face draining of color as her wide eyes darted to Walter. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had refused service to the very man who owned the establishment. Walter stepped forward, his movements deliberate and composed. The guests, staff, and Amanda all watched him with rapt attention, the room now silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Thank you, Daniel," Walter began, his voice steady and warm. "It's true, I own this hotel. But more importantly, I've dedicated my life to building spaces where people from all walks of life can feel welcome and respected." His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Amanda, who looked as if she wanted to disappear. "Today, I was judged not for my actions or my character, but for a piece of clothing. This hat, he said, lifting it slightly from his head, means different things to different people. To me, it symbolizes the values I've held dear my entire life: resilience, opportunity, and the belief that hard work can lead to success. He paused, letting his words sink in. But today wasn't just about me. It was about the assumptions we make about others, how quick we are to judge based on appearances or preconceived notions. Walter turned to Amanda, his expression firm but not unkind. Amanda, you had the power to make a choice today, to treat me with respect or to let your assumptions dictate your actions. You chose the latter. And while I'm disappointed, I hope this moment serves as a lesson. Amanda's face burned with shame, and she nodded weakly. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes, she stammered. I didn't mean. Walter held up a hand to stop her. I accept your apology, he said gently. What matters now is what you take from this experience. Growth comes from recognizing our mistakes and making a commitment to do better. He turned back to the gathered crowd. Let this be a reminder to us all. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of how they look or what they believe. The Sterling Grand is a place of inclusivity, and I expect everyone, staff and guests alike, to uphold that standard. The room erupted in applause, a mix of admiration and reflection on Walter's words. Amanda's embarrassment lingered, but she felt a small glimmer of gratitude for Walter's grace. She resolved, then and there, to change her ways. As Walter placed the MAGA hat back on his head, he gave a small nod to Daniel and the crowd. The lesson had been delivered, and the message was clear. Appearances can be deceiving, and respect is universal. As the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, Amanda Gray remained frozen behind the front desk, her thoughts spinning. The weight of what had just transpired pressed down on her like a heavy stone. She had judged Walter Hayes, assumed the worst based on a piece of clothing, and acted in a way that now seemed painfully short-sighted. Her mind replayed every moment of their interaction. The way he had spoken calmly, the quiet dignity he had maintained despite her hostility, and the crushing realization that the man she had tried to turn away owned the very hotel where she worked. The respect he commanded from the staff and guests only deepened her humiliation. Amanda's embarrassment wasn't just public. It was deeply personal. She had prided herself on being someone who stood for inclusivity, yet her actions had exposed a glaring blind spot in her beliefs. The MAGA hat, a symbol she had dismissed as divisive, clearly meant something far more personal to Walter. She had failed to look beyond her assumptions. The whispers and glances from the remaining guests stung, but what hurt most was her own reflection. She had let her biases dictate her actions and hurt someone who deserved better. That night, Amanda stayed late, replaying the events in her mind. She resolved to face her mistake, learn from it, and make amends, not just to Walter, but to herself. It was the only way she could begin to heal and grow. The following morning, Amanda Gray woke with a knot in her stomach. She had spent a sleepless night reflecting on her actions, feeling the sting of shame and regret. She knew she couldn't undo the humiliation she had caused Walter Hayes, but she could take responsibility and try to make things right. Gathering her courage, Amanda requested a private meeting with him through the general manager, Daniel Reed. Later that afternoon, Amanda entered the meeting room at the Sterling Grand, her heart pounding. Walter Hayes was already there, seated at the far end of the table. His calm demeanor was the same as before, but his gaze held a quiet strength that made her nerves even more apparent. "Mr. Hayes," Amanda began, her voice trembling slightly, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I wanted to say how deeply sorry I am for how I treated you yesterday." Walter leaned back slightly, observing her. "Go on," he said, his tone neither harsh nor forgiving. Amanda swallowed hard. "I let my assumptions and personal biases guide my actions. I didn't see you as a person. I saw a hat and made unfair judgments. That was wrong, and I have no excuse." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Acknowledging your mistake is a good start," he said. "But what matters is what you do next. This isn't just about me. It's about how you treat everyone who comes through these doors." Tears welled in Amanda's eyes. "I promise to do better. I'll educate myself and ensure I never act that way again." Walter offered her a small, understanding smile. Growth is never easy, Amanda, but it's necessary. I accept your apology, and I hope you'll honor your promise. Relieved, Amanda left the room determined to become a better person. The incident at the Sterling Grand Hotel quickly became a turning point, not just for Amanda but for the entire staff. Walter Hayes, understanding the importance of education over punishment, implemented mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees. He used the experience as a teachable moment, emphasizing empathy, respect, and the dangers of making assumptions. Amanda, determined to honor her promise, actively participated in the training and began engaging with guests and colleagues more thoughtfully. Her humility and willingness to grow earned her the respect of her peers. Word of Walter's grace and leadership spread throughout the community, inspiring conversations about bias and understanding. Guests returned to the hotel, not just for its luxury, but because it had become a symbol of growth and inclusivity, a legacy Walter had always envisioned. In the months following the incident, Amanda Gray transformed into a model of professionalism and empathy at the Sterling Grand Hotel. She worked diligently to rebuild trust, going out of her way to welcome every guest with respect, regardless of their appearance or background. Her growth didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues began to admire her humility and effort to change. Walter Hayes, meanwhile, continued to lead by example, visiting the hotel frequently to ensure his vision of inclusivity thrived. The story of his quiet dignity and Amanda's redemption became a hallmark of the hotel's culture, symbolizing the power of accountability and second chances. The Sterling Grand became known as a place where respect reigned, and Walter's red MAGA hat became a conversation starter, one that reminded everyone of the value of seeing beyond assumptions and embracing humanity. Months later, Walter Hayes sat in the Sterling Grand Hotel lobby, his red MAGA hat still proudly perched on his head. A young guest hesitated before approaching him, curiosity lighting her eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she asked. "Can I ask about your hat?" Walter smiled warmly. "Of course. It's more than a hat. It's a reminder of resilience, opportunity, and the importance of treating others with respect." As the young woman listened, the lesson of that day spread further, inspiring understanding and change. This story shows how humility and growth can transform lives. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more impactful stories. Stay tuned. Our next video will challenge assumptions in a way you won't expect.